welcome to the third week of Shelter Sounds, a weekly program featuring conversations with professional American musicians live from their homes in the United States. Shelter Sounds is produced by the Forum for Cultural Engagement and the American Center in Moscow in coordination with the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. My name is Florence Dore. I'm a singer-songwriter based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and we're here to join Mary Lee Kortes, a singer, songwriter, and author in conversation today. Also with us are her band, Phil Camino, the drummer, Jeremy Chadsky, bass player, and her husband, Eric Amble, the guitarist. Welcome. I think that what we should do, so that those of you who have not had the pleasure of listening to Mary Lee is to go right into a clip of her wonderful song, Dreaming of Him.
One, two, one, two, three.
He visited my house, had dinner with my mom. The remote, he took me to the prom. He taught me how to fish. He taught me how to boat. He asked me for my hand. He asked me for my vote. In my dreams, dreaming of him. In my dreams, dreaming of him. Sometimes he's a clown. Once he was a nurse. He made me feel all better, till he made me feel all worse. We walked among the crowds. He struggled with his fame. We smuggled through the night, hid in a picture frame. In my dreams, dreaming of him. In my dreams, dreaming of him. Oh, I was digging deep with pure abandon. He said he lent a hand, but then he didn't have one. I said that I might fall. He said, go right ahead. He didn't care at all. That fall would leave me dead. In my dreams, dreaming of him. In my dreams, dreaming of him.
That's fantastic. Thank you for showing that. So Mary Lee, it's really good to be in conversation with you. Just so the viewers know, full disclosure, Mary Lee and I used to be in a songwriting group together back in New York. So we've been collaborators before and we're old friends. And like her, I've written a book. This one is about rock and roll and literature, but there's a lot of stuff on Dylan in there. So we have that in common too. So why don't you talk, Mary Lee, just a little bit about your book and what inspired you to write about Bob Dylan and to collect all these dreams? Maybe you can just tell people what the book is and how you came up with that idea.
Are you referring to this book, Florence?
Dreaming of Dylan.
Oh, I was trying to understand what the Russian translation. Yes, I confess I've had a lot of dreams of Bob Dylan. People sometimes don't like to talk about their dreams in public. I don't have that particular filter. But the dreams I've had of him have always been very positive. And he, in these dreams, tells me how much he loves my music. He thinks I'm really great. And he tells me, never give up. Don't stop. So you can imagine how wonderful that felt to hear Bob Dylan telling you, keep making your wonderful music. So one day after having one of these great dreams, it occurred to me that I couldn't be the only person on this planet dreaming of Bob Dylan. He's kind of famous. So I started asking people, have you ever had a dream of Bob Dylan? And I thought this would be a wonderful book with illustrations, photographs. And I asked enough people and I got enough dreams. And fortunately, there was a publisher that agreed with me that this was a great idea. And so here it is, Dreaming of Dylan.
One of those people you asked to convey a dream to you is my husband, Will Rigby, who drummer for the DBs and who played with Steve Earle for many years, along with your husband, Eric Ambel. So who are the people you chose to talk about Dylan in your book, besides my husband? Were they all musicians or mostly musicians?
No, most of them are not musicians. There's a plumber, there's a pastor, there's Patti Smith. There's a guy who works in a grocery store who had a dream about Dylan and food. So there's people from all walks of life right next to each other. Because once I put out the call, it got out to a lot of people, and lots of people dream of Bob. So
right. Well, maybe we could talk about, this was the purpose of your visit to Russia, right? Mm-hmm.
That's what got us.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about what your trip to Russia was like. What was your, most memorable show there, or what, and we could also open this up to the band. Jeremy, Eric, and Phil could talk about what they remembered, but maybe we'll start with you, Mary Lee.
Okay. Russia was an incredible experience for all of us. And I grew up in a small town in Michigan. And if you had told me that one day when I grew up, I would be a professional musician and get to tour in Russia, I would have said, really? It's going to all work out that well? Incredible. I started making music. Music came into my life through my grandmother, who was a great organ player. And she would play all these songs from the American Songbook, classic songs from Gershwin, Cole Porter, etc. And that was my introduction to music. So I fell in love with music and ultimately became a songwriter and a guitar player and performer, and toured other places, but I never ever thought I would get to Russia in my life. So to have music get me there was a dream come true. And the being in Russia was really not like anything else. The audiences were incredible. In every town we were in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Taliata, Samara, gorgeous people. They danced to my songs. It was incredible. They were so loving and lively, and they just wanted the music so badly. They were very generous to us, and we made some good friends there. So
that's really great.
I think for all of us, definitely a high point in our lives so far.
Jeremy, do you want to share anything about your experience in Russia?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, the whole tour was amazing. I particularly thought playing in some of the less well-known, I mean, we were in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and those were, you know, fascinating as you'd expect, but spending a couple days in like Taliata, which I don't know that I had heard of before we'd gone there. The thing that really struck me is how those, you know, cities all had these beautiful opera. We played in these, I think there in Samara, we played in these opera houses that were just beautiful. I mean, you know, and for you know, certainly nicer than anything in the States we would be playing at in not one of the bigger cities. And you know, it had really great appreciative crowds there. It was really quite memorable.
Great. And what about you, Eric? Do you want to talk about your trip to Russia?
Well, we did have a nice time, and I love all the food, and you know, there were new experiences and some kind of funny breakfasts. One out in the country was just like boiled hot dogs and eggs, but I like that kind of thing. But I think my favorite was one of the opera houses that we went to. We were traveling without our equipment, and I'm really into my equipment and having the right sound out of my guitar. So we were provided amplifiers in each place. And in one town, we got there and it's a huge stage, and then there was this little tiny amplifier, and started looking at it. My favorite amplifier is the Fender Pro Junior, which is a very small amp, and I had them at my club, the Lakeside Lounge, and I've used them to play for 10 people, and I've used them to play for 10,000 people. And at this opera house, I started looking closely, and what they had was, it actually was the Russian Pro Junior. It had the same tubes and the same speakers and the same two knobs. It's a Urasov, and there's a picture of it there. And that's
Nice.
the Russian Pro Junior, and it sounded fantastic. It was like an old friend right there.
Oh, that's great. What about you, Phil?
What Jeremy and Eric just said, I totally, you know, I feel the same way about, you know, everything they said. I agree with you. Two things that I can add for myself was, one, I loved the fact that the vodka was so cheap and good. And two, the Moscow subway system was amazing. I learned it in a day, and I got anywhere I wanted to. And I still, to this day, I have a subway map on my wall, a Moscow subway map on my wall to remind me of how things could be. Because in New York, you know, the greatest city in this country, we can't figure out a good subway system. And I mean, it was amazing. It was amazing. I was in awe of it. You know, and I had a great time, because while I was in Moscow, I went everywhere I wanted to so easily. So with the short amount of time that we had, I got to go to a lot of different places.
Fantastic. So there's a question that somebody sent in earlier that I thought I would pose to all of you. I thought that our viewers might want to know something about who the band has played with. So maybe you could talk about that in whatever order you would like. The question is, how did you decide to take music as your career? And so I guess I'd love to hear about that, but also tell us the most famous people you've played with. Jeremy, you've played with Bruce Springsteen, right? I mean, that's incredible. What was that like? And, you know, when you were conceiving of your life as a musician starting out, were you thinking, okay, yeah, probably one day I'll play with Bruce Springsteen?
Well, no, I guess I guess not. Yeah, that was a great experience. I did a record with him that came out in 2006. I mean, the whole story, actually, it all came to pass by playing. I played at his birthday party with this band I played with. It had a fiddle and an accordion in it, and did a lot of sort of traditional rootsy music. And this was, sometime in the 90s. And, we ended up playing with him for a while there and hanging out a good bit. And then he was contributing this song to a Pete Seeger tribute record, again, 95, 90, I can't even remember, sometime in the 90s. And he just at very last minute called a bunch of us, and we went and recorded all these folk songs in his living room and at his farmhouse. And it was literally just, 8, 10 musicians, semicircle in a room, about the size of the room I'm in right now, just open mics and everything. Every single song he would just come out, and he'd sort of learned a couple, 5, 10 of these like folk songs, and he would just come, just like start strumming it, and then we like roll tape and we'd record 2 or 3 takes of each. And that was it. And then a version of We Shall Overcome ended up coming out on this compilation record. And that was, and
You nice guy.
then, yes, he's a very nice guy. Yeah. He was, he's the most enthusiastic, hardest working, energetic, just great to, everything is very positive, and just, this, it was total fun. And then basically like 10 years later, he decided just to sort of do some more recording like that. And it turned into this record, which he put out, and we toured, I think in 2006 for about a year. But yeah, no, it was wonderful. I mean, he was just very enthusiastic and having fun with it and playing great places. And so,
Yeah. Well, Eric,
if you're in music.
Yeah, go ahead, finish. Sorry.
No, go ahead. No,
I was
I'm
going to
done.
ask you, Eric, that I know you played on I Love Rock and Roll. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I don't know, do you want to talk about playing with Joan Jett, or do you want to talk about playing with somebody else? I bet people would be interested in hearing, because you played with a lot of famous people, right?
Well, the Joan Jett thing is kind of funny because I had a band out in Los Angeles in 78 and 79, and my little band, myself and Gary Ryan and Danny Furious from the Avengers, we backed up 2 different singers, a guy named Top Jimmy, who was immortalized by Van Halen in song, and another guy named Rick Elric, who was a tremendous singer. And Joan Jett put a thing in the paper at one point saying Joan Jett is looking for 3 good men. And she had been, the Runaways had been broken up, but she was on the punk rock scene those days. She had produced Journ's only album, GI, which was really tremendous, explosive record. And so they had these big auditions, and like 150 guys tried out for each position. And after they called me after the first night and said, you're in. And then when I got there, it was my whole band. Gary was in and Danny was in, and that was bizarre. And then, so fast forward 35 years later, I'm in the dressing room of the City Winery talking to John Doe. And John Doe from the band X, he had helped with those auditions. And he was like, did I ever tell you the story of those auditions? I said, no. He goes, I told Joan after a bunch of these guys went, Joan, you're going to have to ride around in a van with these guys, and they're all jerks. and Eric and Gary, and they have a band and they're cool. You should just get them. And she went along with it. And I never even knew that until John Doe told me in the basement at the City Winery.
Incredible.
So that's kind of funny.
That's a good story. What about you, Phil? You want to talk about any great gigs or great famous musicians you played with, aside from the very famous Mary Lee Kortes?
Yeah, I'm more of like the handyman version of a musician, where my whole life it's like all I did was say, all I've been doing is saying yes, like, and I grab my toolbox and I go to gigs. So I don't know how many thousands of gigs I've done in my life, to the point where I'm like, I can hardly hear in one ear and stuff like that. But besides recording with Eric a lot, I've done a lot of stuff with him, which is among the best stuff I've recorded. I guess, and I did great gigs with a lot of people, and I can't even remember, but maybe John Cale from the Velvet Underground. I was in his band for 2 years, and that was interesting because the heritage of that band, you know, although he wasn't like Bruce Springsteen, Jeremy, but he was somebody to be respected, to have started like kind of a movement with Lou Reed and stuff. And the big cities we would go to in the States and in Europe would be good, well attended, and then others wouldn't. They would just be filler gigs. But in Eastern Europe, whenever we had a gig in Eastern Europe, the crowds would be lined up when we got there just to get his autograph on a record, and then they'd go back home because they couldn't afford to get into the show. And I thought that level of dedication to an artist, you don't see that here anymore. You know, I mean, you don't see it with guys like that. You see it with new artists, you know, whatever. But I felt so sorry for. I was like, oh my God, yeah, I wish there was a way I can get you in. But they're like, no, it's okay. I'm going to go drive 6 hours back home as long as I got my autograph. And that's like a heavy thing to be an artist and have that.
That's great.
For him, not me, you know. Like,
well, it's interesting. Thank you so much. That's all very interesting. I was going to just turn really quickly to the question of outreach. Mary Lee and I are both really interested in bringing music into the community. And quickly, before I turn to asking Mary Lee about all the various ways in which she has done outreach, I just want to mention that I have just completed a project with some local people here in North Carolina. Starting on next Friday, we're going to release 5 songs per week in the month of July from famous North Carolina bands, Superchunk, the DBs, the Connells, and maybe some bands that His Golden Messenger, that you might not have heard of. But you can go and find out about, this is a fundraiser that we worked on over the pandemic. We were talking before the program started with Eric about recording in quarantine. It's hard to know what to do with yourself as a musician in quarantine. I'm sure those of you who are musicians who are tuning in are experiencing that as well. So we decided to record songs on GarageBand, and they've been produced. And anyway, so there are these 25 songs, and it's a fundraiser for our local venue, the Cat's Cradle. Every town in the United States has a place where bands can play, small venues, small places, and we're very worried about what the pandemic is doing to them economically. So if you want to go to my website, florencedoremusic.com, you can find out more information about this fundraiser starting on Monday. It's been a really wonderful project. But let's talk to you, Mary Lee. You've done a lot of different things with music and outreach. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've done with children and hospitals, or any part of it?
You'd mentioned earlier, how did we choose music as a career?
Yeah.
I did not. Music chose me. I think probably everybody here feels that way. I had to do it. I had to make music and find new ways of doing it all the time. And something that happened for me a few years ago was that I was invited to give songwriting classes to kids who'd lost family in 9/11. And I found that, we all know that music heals. It's sort of a cliche, but it does transform you, and it just gets into those spaces that other things can't get into, and makes you feel better. It helps you get out your sadness, your happiness, everything. And so when I started working with these kids who'd lost family in this most horrific way, and taught them how to write songs and express what they were going through music, words and music. And I loved it so much that I started doing it in other places. I actually went to school and got a degree in social work so that I could have more qualifications to to work with people. And I've started working in hospitals around New York with kids. Some kids have cancer, kids who have other diseases, kids who have other issues. Some are
Your
refugees.
career as a musician is really eclectic. It's not, you're not just a musician. You're a social worker and a musician. You've worked for the United Nations, right?
Yes, I decided one day I took the tour of the UN. I'd always wanted to take the tour. I'd never done it. I'd been living in New York City for a long time and I'd never done that. So I said, I've got some time on my hands. I'm going to go take that tour. And after being there, I was swept away with this feeling of I must work for the United Nations. So I actually I did some editorial work for them for quite some time, and I joined the choir, the UN choir. Not everybody knows it has a choir, and we traveled extensively throughout the world. We have not gotten to Russia yet, but we've been to Asia and lots of places in Europe, and bringing music to audiences there as well as hospitals and orphanages. And, you know, and I wrote a song once called "The Music Got Me Here," and meaning, you know, got me here, but it also got me here. It got me to Russia, got me here talking to you all again today. So it's a great gift to everybody.
So you're basically, it sounds like you pick up on the pieces of music that are translatable into other things, and you put it into these other occupations that you do. So social work, helping people, culture with the UN. So music is sort of, sounds like it permeates everything that you do.
Yeah, and there's a wonderful quote. I don't think I'm going to get it just right, but it has to do with creating. And when you create something, it's an act of defiance, because it proves that no matter what you've been through, you're here. Look at this thing that I just made. Look at this picture I drew. Look at this song I wrote. I'm still here after everything.
That's really a wonderful way of thinking about it. And it maybe another, you know, as a songwriter myself, that just sparks me to think about music as validating your feelings, whatever your feelings might be. If you can put them into a form and make them into a song, it automatically makes them seem important. And so that seems really important.
It makes you dance.
Yes.
What's better than that?
And then it makes you dance. We have somebody asked Mary Lee if you would talk about Ian Hunter.
Sure. I love Ian Hunter. I've opened for him. I've sung with him. I've sung on his records. Ian is one of the most incredible and inspiring artists I can think of, because I don't even know how old he is now, but that guy gets on stage and he is ageless and he's committed. Every micrometer of his being is in that moment delivering rock and roll to people. And he's just as generous in person as he is on stage. Just a lovely, lovely guy.
Wow. So how long have you known him?
Gosh, I think I first met him, I don't know, early 2000s, mid 2000s.
Wow.
Yeah, 15 years or so.
Okay. And so, you know, Mary, can you talk about Mary Lee, one more thing, and then I can turn to some of these other questions that people had written in, which is, are you also a playwright?
Oh, right, I forgot. I have a project called The Songs of Beulah Rowley, which is a story about a Midwestern singer-songwriter who got regionally famous in the United States in the Depression era and died tragically young, but she left behind a number of her compositions and diaries inside an old piano bench, which was later discovered by me.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and so you can learn a lot more about her if you go to my website. And I did an album of these songs. It was produced by Hal Wilner, who very sadly, due to COVID, is no longer here with us. So I'm very, very glad I got to work with him. And it was, I think, his second to last album. So yeah, please, you know, just look around, Google Beulah Rowley or me.
Really, you always strike me as somebody who, like, you think of reasons to write songs. I mean, they come out of you, but also you're like, okay, I'm going to invent this entire person. and write songs from her point of view. Does that strike you as, why do you think you do that?
Well, I know why I did that. It's because I knew I wanted to make another record, but I didn't want to repeat myself. I don't like to do something I've already done. And that, I think, propels me to have ideas pop into my head that are a little different. So I was on tour in London, actually, in England, and I was in London wondering what to do for my next record. And Beulah Rowley popped into my head and said, hey, write my story. So
do you want to talk just a little bit about who Hal is or was and what your relationship to him was?
Oh boy, Hal Wilner. I guess he became most well known as sort of the godfather of the tribute album. His first most famous tribute album was Stay Awake, a tribute to the songs of the themes from Disney movies, which you guys can chime in. I can't even think who all was on that. I don't, Rufus Wainwright was on that, Sid Straw, other people. And he's made and Nino Rota, he did a tribute album to Nino Rota. And he was the musical supervisor at Saturday Night Live for many, many years. And a lovely, generous human being, a true artist. And when I had come up with the Beulah Rowley project and written it, my manager thought that Hal Wilner would be a great producer for this album. And he has an album coming out in the fall, a tribute to T-Rex, which is amazing, which has Joan Jett on it.
Oh,
and
wow.
Tons of other people. It's an incredible record. So everybody should get that too.
Well, thank you. There's a question I thought might be kind of interesting for any of you musicians to answer, which is, what is your advice to young singers in Russia? Have you got any advice for young singers in Russia?
Sing as often as possible.
My advice would...
Saying, what do you say, Eric?
Well, don't wait to move to the big city. Go ahead and find some people and where you live and work on things. We've all got the internet and get out from there. Years ago, people would try to hitch their wagon on the big city, and I think there may be a time for somebody to go to the big city, but I wouldn't underestimate the work that you can do at home.
Which is an important point, actually, just as a detour at this moment in particular. Do you want to talk a little, Eric, about how you've adapted to social distancing and everything being shut down and people not being able to necessarily come into, maybe some of the viewers don't know, Eric is a producer. He actually produced my first record, Lucky Me, Perfect City, in his studio Cowboy Technical in New York. So do you want to talk about what that's been like, Eric, shifting to the pandemic and how recording has changed for you?
Well, I'm really lucky that I've always had some sort of home recording setup in addition to the big recording studio that we've had for 20 years in Brooklyn. But just around the new year, Mary Lee and we revamped our whole home studio and updated everything. So it was just in tip-top shape. And it's kind of funny because it put me in a position to really be able to work with a lot of people as soon as the pandemic hit. I got some songwriters reached out to me. Andrew Grimm from the band June Star was writing songs, and we were internet collaborating, and it's really, it's not the same as people playing in the same room, which is really, over the years, has been my favorite and kind of my expertise. But there's a lot of lessons that all that experience, it's helped. Now, since the pandemic, I'm I'm working almost constantly, and I'm kind of like the producer role is a lot like you become the Australian sheepdog as you're herding all the overdubs in and speaking to everybody. And I'll have to say that one of the greatest things that has come along for internet collaboration in years is a piece of software that was written by some young guys in Russia called Audio Movers. And what Audio Movers does, it's a little subscription thing. It allows people to collaborate. You know, you send a collaborator a link and you're literally in their studio working on music together, listening through your high-res rig. So I have to tip my hat to the young guys in Russia who came up with Audio Movers.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Let's see. Other folks want to talk about advice to young songwriters. Mary Lee's is sing all the time. Eric's is don't wait to go to the big city, do it now. What about you, Jeremy, Phil? Do you have anything to add?
I mean, listen to a lot of stuff too. I think,
Yes.
you know, that's, you know, maybe at the risk of sounding like an old guy, maybe, you know, go back a little bit in the catalog from what's, you know, just popular now too. Because I think so many singers now, you kind of hear them like, you're like third generation influence, you know, they're clearly influenced by somebody who is influenced by somebody who's influenced by somebody. So, you know,
Well, I
try to go
find
back
that
to this.
as a songwriter myself, you know, because I'm born, well, I won't say exactly when I'm born, but I'm born well after rock and roll was quite established. So I think
Right.
unless you're born, you know, in a moment when rock and roll is emerging in your 20s, you're always having to go back in the catalog, right? You're always having to go back and learn that Chuck Berry stuff. And I agree with you.
Yeah.
I returned to songwriting after many years of leaving it to the side. Like Mary Lee, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't live without it. And yeah, the way that I got back into it was to like try to find the song that I wish I wrote, you know, and listen to it and try to learn that and then make my own thing out of it. So that's advice. I think that's good advice too, all these. What about you, Phil?
I would say to add to everything that was just said, it's a numbers game. Just write 1 million songs, write 1 million pieces of music, just get it out of you. And then then you'll find places for what you've done in the past, maybe that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't have done it. You know, it's just like go out there and it's almost like working out. You don't work out for 9 hours one day and then next month 9. You work out every day a little bit. And I think that's the key to getting really good at anything, but it's songwriting especially. I mean, it's like the more you do it, the better chance you have of something hitting, and then borrow from yourself and stuff like that.
Go ahead, Eric.
It's important to know that Phil is an award-winning songwriter, and you got the Paul Williams Award?
No, I got an ASCAP award for I forget what it exactly is, for excellence in a series or something, because I co-wrote, I wrote 1 million pieces of music, and from doing that, I got connected and finally joined up with a guy who had a connection. And I had a bunch of guys like that I knew from New York who were great. And we landed a Nickelodeon cartoon theme song, which we got the end credit theme, which is a lot of money lost, but it's you know, the show is like the most popular cartoon, and the first year it was out, I went to LA and I got this award and shook hands with Paul Williams, and he tried to get me to go to an AA meeting with him and all kinds of stuff. That's a true story.
Good story. All right. So I have a question here from Edward. I think anyone could answer this one. What is the musical geography of the US? Do some musical genres relate to some specific places in the US and not others? That's a really good question.
That's a good one for you, Florence. I think maybe
Okay.
that's why don't you get the ball rolling on that one?
I'm going to
Yeah,
get the ball rolling and then you guys can join in. Well, originally, American popular music was, you know, it happened all over the place, but popular music in the 50s, what became kind of rock and roll was a Southern creation in the US South. But so was country music and so was the blues. And then as people kind of started to listen to it all over the country, it became kind of urban as well. So I think that we do associate maybe different regions with different music. Like there's a New York Velvet Underground kind of punk thing that you could point to. There's the REM Atlanta, you know, kind of Athens, Georgia thing. So, and then there's country music and its associations with Nashville. But because all this popular music happened when technology was disseminating it all over the world, I kind of think those geographic boundaries are a little bit of a fiction, but I don't know. What do other people think?
Well, I'm from Michigan, which is the birthplace of Motown, Detroit. But as you said, because of radio, people hear it everywhere, heard it everywhere, and continue to hear it everywhere. But where things are born, there's always a sense of pride in that locale.
That's a good point. So not a fiction in a certain way, right? People in Detroit are really proud of the fact that Motown emerged from that place. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of the cities that, you know, are most associated with music in the States are ones where there's the biggest melting pot, for lack of a better term. Right. You know, New Orleans, you have like Creole country, you know, you have all these different, you know, cultures living together, and you know, the music's all, you know, that's how you get the birth of, you know, of so many like American genres of all these different cultures that are sort of in one place, borrowing influences from each other.
Yeah. That's a good point. And then there's like the banjo, which was originally an African instrument, right? Comes over here. So right. Yeah. So there are places that are associated with different musics, and that you can maybe point to the different qualities of them. And then they also start to, because of radio and records, bleed into one another. Any other comment on that?
Well, you get somebody like Elvis, and he's doing songs that were written by guys in an office building in New York City.
Exactly.
So, but it's all kind of the same. But you know, I think the mythology is wonderful. So if people want to think of some music being rooted in some place, as long as they don't think about it in a limiting way. Yeah. If they want to just have their own happy fantasy that it came from some place, that's cool. But you know, like the Chicago blues, it was all these guys from the South that came up there, and then some businessmen that enabled them to make their records. You know, so you know, it is American. You know,
in that way, very mixed. Yeah. Vernon Dalhart, I think he had the first country hit in America in the 20s, The Wreck of the Old 97, was it? And that guy he's from Texas, I think, but he was singing on Broadway. He was singing Broadway tunes when they recorded him singing that first country hit. So it was a kind of stylized marketing thing from the beginning. So yeah, both are true. They are sort of associated regionally, and also America's very, very mixed. And so it's not really strict. Here's a great question for Mary Lee, I think. Vasily asks, if you had to sing about only a single topic, what would it be?
Oh dear, that's rough.
Talk about the roughness of it.
Well, all emotions feed into one another.
Right.
All experiences. I I wanted to say pain.
Yeah.
Because if you write about pain, you can also write about coming out of pain.
Yeah.
And transformation. I like transformation. I'm big on transformation. So I would probably start with pain.
Yeah.
Love is, great, but
Pain is more fruitful. Let's be real.
yeah. And the process of it, and how bad is it, and it went away and it came back. It's kind of, the possibilities are endless.
Well, the myth of Orpheus, isn't it that it's his loss, the loss of his love led to all music in Ovid, something like that. So pain is kind of quintessentially musical. But I like what you're saying about how rough it is, because everything transforms and emotions kind of seep into each other, and it would be impossible. But it's a cool thought experiment, Vasily.
And there's no birth without pain.
Yeah, right.
So
Right. So it's pretty essential to the human condition.
it can be a good thing.
It can be a good thing. And as a parent, it's a good thing to remember, because when you see your kid having suffering, which, I mean, many of you have children probably who are watching in the pandemic, it's terrible to see. They can't do anything. But then you remember, as Mary Lee is reminding us here, that to have pain is to be alive. And so transforming that pain is, I think, Mary Lee, your works does seem to be very much about that.
I hope so. I've always wanted to, I feel for me, listening to music is transformative, and that's what's positive about it. So I've wanted to help other people have that experience too.
Yeah. It's so nice.
Without sounding too pompous.
Musicians are nice.
But mythology.
Yeah.
I think that like all art, but like for me, music, which is what I know, is the greatest thing for pain. I find it way easier to write music and do things when I'm in a pained place.
Yep.
And it's way harder when I'm not. And what that does is it helps me with the pain. It's almost like you're purging it out of you, just to get it out. And I find it like that's the whole thing. I mean, Beatles songs that, some of my favorite Beatles songs, they're painful. If I fell in love with you and stuff like that, they're all coming from places where you have a heartache.
Mm-hmm. That is really, I love this conversation about pain. And I'll just tell you this story about my Cover Charge is the name of this pandemic album that we're putting together as a benefit. There will be coverchargemusic.com will go live next week, but come to my website and I'll give you all the announcements about it, florencedoremusic.com. But yesterday I was listening, all of this, Mary Lee and Phil's comments make me remember yesterday I was walking my dogs in my neighborhood and listening to the sequence. There are 25 songs that these bands put together. And that's a lot. So sequencing them was actually really quite a task, figuring out what order they should come into so that they would be most effective. So I'm walking my dogs and listening to our sequencing, and I burst into tears. I just burst into tears. And I think it's because the record is about the pandemic, right? In so many ways, we're worried about whether we're going to have a venue to play at when we come out. We're all in pain in a certain kind of way, because it's hard to be under lockdown and not be able to see people and be social. And the songs really address that too. The song I did with Jeremy Chatsky plays on the song we recorded in quarantine for this, is Somewhere Down the Line. And it makes me choke up even to say it. Somewhere down the line, it's going to be more than fine. Music is about pain and about comforting you in pain and bringing up the pain even. So anyway, I think that's a great, if anybody has any more comments about that, that'd be great.
Pandemic.
Pain.
There's a great quote by Yogi Berra, the great baseball player, to me, that every once in a while in your life, the quote makes everything make sense. It's the future ain't what it used to be.
That's a good one.
You just got to roll with it, man.
Got to roll with it. Yeah. And I think it's hard for sure. And I think music can be very healing in this moment. So here's a question from Nick Outerside. Sorry if this sounds like a Q magazine type question, but each of you guys, who is the single biggest musical influence on your lives? Mary Lee, do you have one?
You know, I want to say George Gershwin.
Amazing.
I mean, I consider myself a pop songwriter, even though a lot of people wouldn't say that. But it gave, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up listening to those songs and that style of songwriting.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that informed a lot of my development. Of course, Bob Dylan is up there.
My understanding is that Gershwin is very well known in Russia. Is there a particular song that you love that you want to just?
Oh, I Got Rhythm. I love that song. Anything Goes. Well, no, that's Cole Porter, isn't it? Anyway.
I Got Rhythm.
And Rhapsody in Blue it's not a song, but that has been a big part of my life. That's
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Jeremy, Phil, Eric? Do you have a single influence that you could point to?
That's such a hard question.
It is.
I mean, but if I was going to boil it down real quick, I'd say I'm half Beatles and half Who. So it's the Beatles sensibility with the Who's recklessness that I feel influenced me the most.
What songs, like when you were like a kid learning how to play the drums, like which one can you remember trying to play along to and going,
Oh God. I mean, I would play to Who's Next in Quadrophenia all day long. I was blessed with parents that thought that me being a musician, being simple people from the old country, me being a musician was an honor. So I never had a negative word about what I was doing. I would bass drums all day and my parents would put up with it. And then my brother did the same. So
That's
I was
so
blessed
sweet.
with that.
That's sweet. What about you, Eric?
John Philip Sousa.
Really? Because from
John
your
Philip Sousa
marching
would be
band
my.
days.
Yeah, you know, as a kid, I lived in a small town, and you know, as a kid, I went to the parade, and I heard the song coming down the street. And for people that don't know that much about marching bands, the band is arranged in rows by instrument, by section. So I heard the song coming down the street. Then I heard each individual part and section as it went right by me on a sidewalk, and then it turned back into the song again. And it was a most profound thing. This was before I started piano lessons, before I learned the trumpet. And I've been thinking a lot about it also related to multi-track recording, in that I was hearing these things separately. And but then during the pandemic, there have been, you know, everyone is at home, and unbeknownst to me, there's a flute player. I don't know if they're in our building or a building next door, but the flute player has been working out every once in a while and playing the awesome part to Stars and Stripes Forever, the piccolo flourish towards the end of the song. And it's made me think about John Philip Sousa.
That's great. Jeremy?
You know, I mean, at the risk of sounding boring, going, you know, like going back to when I was a kid, it really probably was the Beatles. And, you know, probably before I even really fully knew what the different instruments were, it was like, you know, I knew Paul McCartney played bass. So I guess that idea was in my head for sure. You know, and then when I was in high school, more stuff, you know, like Elvis Costello or Graham Parker was pretty influential. And then, you know, got into more like kind of soul music and R&B music, and the bass players who played on those that were probably, now I would consider more of it an influence. But you know, really what wanted to get me started, it was probably the Beatles.
Yeah, that's probably true for so many of us. Well, one thing I was wondering is if there's a younger pop musician who you admire. So for me, as I mentioned, I'm returning to songwriting and making music after many years. And I have a 15-year-old daughter too. So she has really hipped me to Sarah Bareilles, a young singer. I mean, I guess she's not even that young, but she's younger than the other people we're talking about. So I love Sarah Bareilles. And who do you guys listen to who's sort of more current? Anybody that comes to mind? Maybe.
Yeah. I get stuff, you know, if I know, you know, I'm not very good at keeping up with current music on my own, but like you, I have a daughter, although she's 8. So I get a lot of the stuff from her, some of which I could really do without, but she started listening to Lizzo. And we got that whole record, and I think it's great.
Lizzo is so awesome. Good. Same thing.
We had it in the car constantly, and I'll still listen to it any day. And I think it's.
Oh my God! I mean, yeah, I was like learning Lizzo songs when my daughter played with that. What about you, Mary Lee? Totally. Oh, Lizzo is okay. So let me just, in case you don't know who she is, go find her videos. She is an African-American singer. I don't actually even know where she's from. Do you guys know where Lizzo's from?
I know she was in Minneapolis for a while. I don't know if that's where she was born, because I know she had some Prince connection.
Middle West, but yeah, not from any big city, I don't think, but she plays the flute. And I think she played the flute in her band, like Roscoe. She was interested in band at a young age.
Yeah, in a conservatory even or something.
Yeah. And now she's just this wildly famous singer-songwriter. I think she must be in her 20s. It's notable that she's very self-confident, kind of a large woman, and doesn't, feels beautiful in her body. So I think a lot of people are inspired by that. Mm-hmm. And she's just a great singer. She just really, and boy, does she have energy, and her songs are not complicated, but they're just so catchy.
During the pandemic, I discovered, well, it was a discovery for me, a young girl named Madison Cunningham.
Okay.
And she is an incredible guitar player and singer. And I found out she's got a whole career and everything, but she kind of jumped on playing these really unique cover versions early on, and I started watching her stuff. Her guitar playing is very unique, and a great singer. Probably the best sort of new thing that I've seen through the, especially.
Good to know. I'm writing that one down. Madison Cunningham, huh?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Well, that was a fruitful question. I
really like Sia.
Okay.
I love Sia. I don't know how young she is anymore either, but the song Chandelier, I love that song.
It's a really good song. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, totally. Here's a good one. From Robert. Could you share some of your vocal warm-up exercises? How do you prepare your voice before a performance or a recording? It's a great question. Mary Lee, do you?
I actually rarely do. Eric and I were just talking about this the other day. It's funny. I rarely do vocal exercises, but I find other kinds of physical exercise warms up my voice really well. Jumping jacks, running in place, push-ups, things like that. Really, it warms up my.
Yeah.
My whole body gets warmed up. My voice is also warmed up.
Yeah. What I noticed, and you probably never had this problem, Mary Lee, because you've just been continuing to sing. I didn't sing for a long time. So when I came back to it, I had to sing all the time. I would wear my voice out singing too much. But in general, the way that I warmed up for the shows that I did in March, I just sang. I just sang hard songs that were difficult for me. This one Patty Griffin song, Silver Bells, it has this interesting trill. And did it over and over again. And I would sing that song and be like, stretching out my voice. Eric, you were going to say something.
Well, this is what Mary Lee and I were talking about. Phil and I did a tour in the mid 2000s with the band called
2008.
the Brandos, and it was the guy was, you know, quite rigid in his approach to the rock and roll, and during the rehearsals, he said, you know, he talked about everything in like we do this vocal warm up, and he was telling me, you know, so that meant he and the bass player did this whole vocal warm up, and he was like, we do the vocal warm up, you're welcome to join in, you don't have to do it, you know, but it was a full on, you know, 10 to 15 minute syllable scale thing. And it was like, okay, we're on tour, we're going to be in a dressing room. I mean, if I didn't join in the vocal warm up, I'd have to be listening to the thing and want to die. So I went ahead and did it. And the guy with his rigid set list, the Brandos show, it went and built to an incredible crescendo, you know, by the end of the show, which had him delivering these blood-curdling, screaming vocals. If you know, they had a hit called Gettysburg. And my job, as high as he went, I always had to go higher. And really the funny part was that the whole tour, I never had any trouble hitting those high notes. And it was, I have to say that the warm-up was really something else. And it was the only time before or since that I've ever properly warmed up, but it was really something.
Well, that is just fascinating conversation, you guys. We have, we've got one more question I thought I would ask. Why don't we start with Eric, Phil, and or Jeremy, and we'll end with our star, Mary Lee, which is, what do you like most about what you do as a musician? That was a question that came in earlier. So we'll take this one as our last one, and then we'll say goodbye. So Jeremy, do you want to talk about what you like most about being a musician, a bass player?
You know, it's probably the diversity of experience you have, you know, getting to play with so many different people, getting to travel, getting to always be, I mean, hopefully that is something that comes back. I'm not entirely convinced of that, but, you know, being able to, you know, to see the things that you've seen and to be always doing different things. And to me, that's the best, probably if I had to highlight one, that's probably the best part.
Yeah. Eric?
My answer would be kind of similar. It's the diversity of the whole thing, you know, whether it's playing or recording or helping somebody or doing a gig or getting to travel. And there's what we do, we get feedback in a way that very few people get immediate feedback, unless if you were a chef and you brought somebody a fabulous plate of food. We get this feedback, and that's really nice.
Live feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Phil?
So it's such a hard question because there's so much, but I would say the two things is, you know, the way it makes you feel when you're making music. Like all the say the rehearsing and learning songs is like work, but once you're performing, it's this feeling that you can't get from anything else. And the next thing is the camaraderie between the people you're playing with. That feeling of being with those people, it's like you know, it's like the camaraderie that maybe a sports team might have, or guys in a battle. You know, you'll have connections with those people whenever you see them and be like, yeah, I remember, you know, like this thing, it's us trying to do something together, you know?
Yeah, I would say
it's no finer team than the guys that I'm looking at right there.
I'll
Sure.
just say my thought about this, and then we'll turn to Mary Lee to wrap it up for us. I agree with everything everyone has said, and it's the sense of community, kind of related to that bonding that you feel with the people that you're playing with. And then even bigger than that, it's like why Mary Lee and I are friends, and why Mary McBride, who put us together here today, and I still have connections. It brings people together in an amazing way. And you do feel a connection with the people in your band, but also with people in other bands. There's this kind of, I don't know, unspoken code, and it's pretty wonderful. But we'll turn to Mary Lee now. Mary Lee, what do you like most about what you do?
I have to say, to put it generally, it would be the way it's allowed me to experience life and the world, which incorporates, all of these things, that how you get to be with people. It's unique. It's like we were talking earlier, it's transformative. Also, I'm a creation addict. I love to make things up. And I love writing. Performing is a very creative act. You've got to be right there in the moment. Something goes wrong, you got to pick it up and make something out of it. And it goes back to that quote I was talking about earlier, that all of us have faced some kind of threat in our lives, whether it's physical or emotional. And creativity is an act of defiance in the face of destruction. And that's what I love about what I do.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Mary Lee. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks to Mary for having us. Yeah.
Oh, and just, I'm sure I can speak on behalf of everyone. Thank you so much to the Forum for Cultural Exchange for getting us to Russia, to the American Center in Moscow, and to the Russian people who came to see us. We love you so much. It's added something that we can't even measure to our lives. So, spasiba.
Спасибо.
Thank you.